Hi everybody, it's Friday again and we're back for another creative writing live class. Hi, so I'll just introduce myself a little bit while we're waiting for people to arrive. Sorry for everybody who hears this every week, but I'm Lucy Atkins. I'm the author of 4 novels. My most recent novel is Magpie Lane, and I'm also a creative writing tutor for the master's degree at Oxford University. And I really want to talk today. This was some people had requested this, and I think it's a good one. It's all about place and settings in your novel. So I'll talk, while we're just getting everyone together, I'll talk a little bit about Magpie Lane, the setting in Magpie Lane. So I live in Oxford and Magpie Lane is set in Oxford. And I resisted setting a book in Oxford for a long time because I've got such mixed feelings about Oxford. And eventually I realised I couldn't really avoid it any longer and I needed to do this. And what I think I got from those mixed feelings was the sense of the beauty of the place, but also the claustrophobia and the tensions between all of these people in their elite colleges and the people in the town and the people who fall in between those two things, which is what I was really interested in. So Oxford, for me, was, I suppose, the location for me. I was sort of resigned to it. I felt like, okay, I've just got to face this. That's not the usual way that I come up with locations for my books. So we'll talk about that. I think what I'm going to do today is talk about why place really matters in a book, and I'm going to give you some practical ways to start thinking about place and how you work with settings and place. And I'm going to give you some things to think about as you write, and also I'm going to think about things that you might think about if you're not sure where to set your book. And these, I'll give you some questions to ask yourself. So we're going to do some sort of tips and some general thinking, and just ask me anything. I'll talk for about 10 minutes and then we'll do questions. So if you break down a novel into something like 3 elements, you're probably going to think of plot, and you're going to think of character, and you're going to think of place. And most writers, or certainly most new writers, spend a lot of time, a vast amount of time, trying to get to grips with the first 2 of those, and they slightly neglect the third. They sort of come up with it as a setting, as a background, and it kind of stays as a background, and that's a big mistake, because setting is not just the backdrop of action. Setting it can be so much more than that. It should be so much more than that. So setting, there are some things that setting does in a book. Setting will create the mood of the book, or the various moods of the book. It will give the book meaning, it will give the themes meaning, and it will give it resonance. So in Magpie Lane, most of Magpie Lane is set in the President's Lodging, which is this kind of 400-year-old house in the centre of Oxford, and it's a very creepy, spooky, but also very beautiful house, saturated with history and all the people who have lived there before. And I liked that as a setting because I like the idea that there's Oxford is a circle, and then the colleges are a circle, and then this lodging house is a circle. So it's like a circle within a circle within a circle. And my themes, one of my themes is this sort of claustrophobia and the secrecy inside a family or a house. So that worked really well for me. There's a lot of, if you think about that, there's a lot of sort of thematic stuff that goes along with choosing that setting. And I think it's a really good idea to sort of ask yourself, when you're thinking about a book, whether you've written it already or you're working on it or you're beginning it, think about what can your setting give you in terms of the things that you want to write about. the setting, it does a lot of invisible work for a book. So it's going to deepen themes, but it's also going to create themes. So if you think about the moors in Wuthering Heights, that setting is sort of creates everything. Everything stems from that spooky, remote place. So really think of it as something way bigger than background. When it's done well, it can almost be a character in its own right. So if you think about, those of you who've read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, think about Mandalay the House. If you haven't read it, I would urge you to read it as an example of how setting is everything. Du Maurier's Rebecca, Mandalay the House is basically the main character, I would say, the main character of the book. And so much springs from that. When it's done well, when place is done well, the book is going to feel real to a reader. And if you haven't got the place quite right, then no matter how good the characters are and how gripping the plot is, you're never really going to get a sense that this is really happening. So don't underestimate it. The other thing I would say about setting is that you think, okay, it's a place, I'm going to locate the book there, that's where it is. A setting isn't really a place. It's a malleable entity. It's a kind of, it's a thing that is there to be manipulated by you, the author. If you think, for example, about the Cobb in Lyme Regis that appears in Persuasion by Jane Austen, that is a very, very different place from the one that appears, the same place that appears in the French Lieutenant's Woman. So really think about it as something that is, it's like a malleable entity is the best way I can describe it. Something that you can shape and twist and develop to serve you as the author. So the way that I choose my settings, as I said at the beginning, choosing Oxford was more of a kind of like, I've just got to do this. Whereas previously I have chosen, I think the way I choose a setting for a book before I write it, it's certainly the very first thing before I've got anything else, I feel a sense of place of where I want to be, because I'm thinking I'm gonna have to be there for like 2 or 3 years. I really want to be there. So I think there are 2 reasons that I choose a setting. One is either I feel really strongly about that place, I feel a real emotional connection to it, or I'm just interested in it in some kind of obscure but very powerful way, which I would say Oxford for Magpie Lane falls into that category. The missing one was set in Seattle, where so it's set in the Pacific Northwest, and I used to live in Seattle, and I had a real longing for that, so I wanted to inhabit it. And The Other Child was set in Boston, where I also used to live, and it was set specifically in the house that I used to live in, and I was just missing it, and I wanted to write about it, and I was also very interested in what it felt like to live in a very nice Boston suburb. And how the dissonance between that and sinister goings on could be really powerful. And in The Night Visitor, my 3rd novel, that's also set, a lot of it is set in Sussex, and I used, the beginning point of that novel was a really creepy manor house that I used to know someone who lived in when I was a child, and I've written about that elsewhere. I think I might even have that on my website. But those are the sort of things I want you to think about when you're thinking about where to set your book. Go deep, go really deep, because the more meaning it's got for you, the more meaning you'll wring out of it, and the more meaning it will have for your reader. At some point I'm going to run out of places, so I'll have to stop writing books, but as it is, go for the powerful connections. So here are 4 questions, list makers, get out your pens. Here are 4 questions that you can start asking yourself when you're thinking about where to set your novel. Ask yourself, number 1, where do I long to be? Is there somewhere that I really wish I could be? Because that will draw you to it, and you'll write about it with enormous passion and love. Number 2, think about what place has a deep meaning for me, something like maybe a childhood place. Number 3, what place do I never want to visit again? That may sound counterintuitive, but it's the strong feelings you're after. If you've been somewhere that was absolutely dreadful, you may want to set part of your book there, or something there. You go there again and see why, and explore those feelings. And then number 4, what place do I have really mixed feelings about? That falls into the Magpie Lane category. I had mixed feelings about it, and it proved, those mixed feelings proved to be incredibly fertile. So don't dismiss places that you have mixed feelings about. Somebody asked, before the class even started, somebody asked, should you do real places? And I've always used real places as the starting point, and then I changed them. But yeah, I like knowing where I am. So my next, I've got a top tip for place, which is, it sounds really obvious, but go there, walk around, spend time there, take a notebook and write down what are the smells, how does it feel, look for details, because the more you can have these little details, these little authentic touches, the more your reader's going to believe it as a place. In Magpie Lane, I went on 2 ghost tours of Oxford while I was writing Magpie Lane, which gave me one of the themes in the book. And I got things from those ghost tours that I would never have got from reading endless accounts of ghosts in Oxford. Specifically, actually, I got one of the characters' professions, which he ended up being a ghost tour person. So I can't underemphasize how important it is to go somewhere. But if you can't go there, then go there virtually. Go there online. I was unable to travel to the Pacific Northwest again when I was writing The Missing One, but I spent an enormous amount of time on Google. I discovered something called an orca cam, where you can watch underwater footage of killer whales, though they hardly ever show up. And I spent a lot of time, and there's something about that, just inhabiting it online. And I've done that a lot. Street view, that sort of thing. Don't underestimate that. Endless Googling and research about the place. I do a lot of research about places, even when I know them really well, because things appear, interesting things just pop up when you're researching a place. So do a lot of, read a lot about the places you want to be in. Even if it feels like you might be wasting time, you're not. 5 things to bear in mind as you write each scene. I would say bear in mind surroundings. What do you think the aspects of that scene, that place are that fit the themes that you're writing about? So really be conscious of what you're doing. Look at number 2, specific visuals. What can your characters see from where they are? This again, it sounds obvious, but you have to inhabit the body of your character, and you have to see what they can see, and you have to smell what they can smell. You can feel what they can feel. And if you come out of that, you lose the reader. The reader suddenly doesn't feel that they're in that place. So really think about that. When you're in a place, what does it feel like? You could also think about the significance of a place, the cultural or political significance of a place. And that, even if you're not writing that kind of book, it can inform, it can give an extra layer of depth and interest to the piece. So with Magpie Lane, with Oxford, I thought a lot about the history of Oxford and the literary and cultural history, and the fact that these graveyards around Oxford are full of the people that sort of shaped the way we think and shaped politics and literature and art. And I really like that as a sort of background to the themes and the plot. 3, finally, it's my last thing I've got to say on this, and I can see some questions coming in. If I forget to answer your question, just ask me again. Sometimes I don't scroll back fast enough. So 3 tips when you're writing about place. Number 1 is don't over describe it. So just pick a few key things in a scene, for example. Just pick a few key things that you're going to focus on that are relevant and important and reflect things. Don't just blanket describe everything in long paragraphs, because that's the way to make your reader fall asleep. Number 2, pick those details because they're meaningful, not because you think you're good at writing about them. And that's a really fine distinction, but it's a really important one. Sometimes you'll keep a whole long passage in just because you think, God, I've written really well in that passage. That's so beautiful. And it's utterly irrelevant. It's going to bore your reader senseless. They might think, oh, you can write really nice metaphors, but they will be out of the book. So be really rigid with yourself. Number 3 is watch out for cliche. If you're going to have something like a climactic storm, you've got to know that you're doing something that has been done before. If you feel that you've seen this done before, that's fine, but just do it in a different way. So place and weather and that kind of thing. In a way, it's very hard to do something that has never been done before, but do it differently. Finally, I'm going to give you, anyone who wants to kind of explore this a bit more, there's a couple of exercises you could try that might get your head around why these settings are so important. So you could try to write a little scene and put it in your chosen setting. So maybe just a couple of paragraphs, and then rewrite that scene and just change the weather. Keep everything, but just change the weather, and then see what changes as you rewrite that scene with different weather. See how the atmosphere changes, how your thoughts change, how you might want to go off in a different way. And a second exercise you can try is to try writing a short scene about something traumatic, and make the setting dark and alarming and disturbing, and then rewrite that scene, but make the setting beautiful and idyllic, and keep the trauma but change the feel of the place, and see how that changes everything. It's just a couple of ways that you can kind of get your head around why it's so important and why you need to think about it as much as you think about plot and character. So I'm going to start answering some questions. Let's see, what have we got? Ask me anything. And also, if you want me to cover something else, we can do that too. I can't find any questions. Has no one asked me anything? Oh, here we go. Right, fictional village based on one I know, set in Yorkshire, but I should change the village to be real. There isn't really a should. So if you've fictionalized a place from your childhood, should you change it to make it real? There's no should about it. You need. It's important to do what you feel drawn to, where you feel drawn to, and write about it in however way that you feel enlivened by. If you're interested and enlivened by your place, then you've got the right place, basically. I would change it, don't stick actual real characters in or you'll be sued, but it's fine to have a completely identifiable, the streets in Magpie Lane, all the streets, getting a bit low, I'm just going to plug it in, all the streets are exactly what they are, it's all real, but the house that I've got, that I've set the thing in, was originally based on a real house, and then I changed everything about it. So that's just got to be what feels right to you. So we've got characters are floating in 3 places and you need to ground them there. Yeah, you need to, your characters, if you feel that they're not connected to the place that you've set the novel in, that just means, I think, that your place isn't really working for you, that you need to feel that their place and the setting is integrated completely with the characters and their whole mindsets, their emotional state. Make sure that you've got it all coming from the same place. So can you get into trouble for using a real place and portraying it in a negative light? Yes, you can, if it's an institution or something. So I wouldn't worry too much about it at this stage. It's the sort of thing when Magpie Lane finally went towards publication, my publisher got the lawyers to read through it, and I did change a couple of details just because I didn't want it to be identified as a specific college. I moved the house to a different location, but they can be really small changes, and I wouldn't spend my time worrying about that. I think the most important thing is imagination and making it yours. How can you avoid cliche when writing something that's set somewhere famous like Oxford? That's a really good question, and I don't really know the answer. I think it's just to come at it in the most authentic and idiosyncratic way that I could, so that I feel like I was writing something that came from deep inside me. And then if that's the case, it's not really going to be a cliche because I'm just me. I'm writing about the place I live now, and I'm worried about people will recognise themselves. Am I at risk of ruining the draft in the editing if I try to anonymise later? No, I think that ties in what I was saying earlier. I think if you're just taking real people and faithfully putting them onto the page, that would suggest to me that you haven't fully invested your personality and imagination into your book yet, and that you need to dig a bit deeper and find out what's really coming from inside of you. And once you start doing that any traits or real things from places or people start to change. It's like what I was saying about this malleable entity, that they start to become something that's more than just the collection of traits or locations. So thoughts of taking artistic liberties with the history of a real place. That is a really interesting thing. You run the risk if you take a real place and you write about its history and then you change things. I think that does run the risk of readers looking at it thinking, but I know that's not true. And the minute readers start to do that, you are running the risk of alienating the reader. If a reader says things like, oh, but that alleyway isn't down the end of that street, that's slightly different from thinking, but wait a minute, there was no, pottery industry in Oxford in 1850. And so be a bit careful, I think I would say. Can I reread the 5 things to bear in mind when writing each scene? I don't need to reread that, because if you go to my website, which is lucyatkins.com, I've put it all on there. All my lovely lists and tips are on there. I've just put it up this morning. So this whole session, the things that I'm talking you through are on there. Are 3 places too many? Is it too many places to have 3? No, I don't think it is too many places. I think you maybe need to decide what your prime location is. But I don't think there's no real rule saying you can't move locations in a book. So as long as you feel it's working for your characters and your plot and your sense of atmosphere, that's fine. I don't think you'll confuse the reader. Somebody enjoyed the creeping sensation of settings in Magpie Lane. Had to leave the lights on one night. Great. I mean, I think that's probably a result of me thinking a lot about place. It was a result of really inhabiting that house and doing a lot of research about houses and about specifically there's a priest's hole in Magpie Lane, and I did a lot of research about that. Almost none of it made it into the book, but it does make it into the atmosphere. So thank you for saying that, and I think that is probably to do with research. Is it possible to set something in a place you've never been to in person? It definitely is. Have anyone read the book The Tenderness of Wolves by Steph Penny? I think she's agoraphobic and never set foot in Canada, and that book is absolutely amazing in terms of place. So yes, you can. Okay, I think we probably have said all we need to say right now about settings and place. as ever, if you think of things afterwards, it's fine to contact me. My Instagram is at Lucy Atkins Writer, and my website is lucyatkins.com. You can email me from that, or I'm on Twitter at Lucy Atkins. And I'm absolutely happy to be contacted. And if you also have things that you might want to do next week, I don't know how many of these I'm going to carry on doing. Maybe I'll do a couple more. But if you've got things that you really want to talk about, let's talk about them. Just contact me and let me know. Okay, thanks everybody for coming, and have a good week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.